Yes, this lesson is on Judaism. This is a part of the culture of Southwest Asia and Northern Africa. As we proceed through this presentation, we're going to become a little more familiar with one of the three monotheistic religions that started in Southwest Asia. As you see by looking at here, you have some unique art and it has its roots in a lot of different areas in the Middle East. As we proceed through this presentation, you're going to see the connection between all these pictures. First, we need to start with Abraham's genealogy. This is the father of Judaism, in which many of the Jews trace their family trees all the way back to the ancient patriarch of Abraham and his wife Sarah. They had some children, and the first child they had was a child of promise, and his name was Isaac. And Isaac had two children named Jacob and Esau. And from this, the descendants of the Hebrews, or the 12 tribes of Israel, came forth. But also, Abraham had another son named Ishmael, which he had with Sarah's maidservant, kind of like a concubine. And Ishmael led to the creation of the 12 Arabian tribes, in which the Islamic faith and Muslim people can trace their family tree back to Abraham, which causes some competition and some hard feelings between both sides, both claiming Abraham as the father of their faith. It all started where Abraham lived in the present-day Iraq. Yahweh, or as he was called by Abraham, called to Abraham and told him to move to a place called Canaan, the Promised Land, which is now in present-day Jordan and Israel. The land was fertile there, and it had plenty enough grass and stuff to feed his sheep. He was a sheep herder. Okay, and he took God at his promise. God said, "Move here. You will be blessed. You will multiply. You have all your needs met." So Abraham took him at his promise and did exactly what Yahweh instructed him to do. Here's the route that Abraham took. As you notice, he starts off down here in Ur of Chaldees, which is in now present-day Iraq. We see the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers running through Iraq right here, or present-day Iraq. At the time, it was known as Babylonia. So he takes the long trek here. And he pauses at Haran, but God says, we must keep going down into the land that I had promised to give you. So he continues south, and he ends up in present-day Israel. He remains there for a period of time, but drought strikes Canaan, and he has to go to Egypt to find food. He doesn't remain there long as problems and tensions mount between Abraham and his Jewish faith and the Egyptians, which were polytheistic, believing in more than one God. So he leaves Egypt and returns back to his homeland after the drought is over. Yahweh made a covenant with his people, or Abraham's people. And this covenant is recorded in the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible, which is called the Torah, the most sacred text in the Jewish religious tradition. They value this very, very much. And the religion of Judaism is a monotheistic faith. That means there is only one God, and his name was Yahweh. This is a picture of ancient Palestine in the time of Abraham. You see the trade routes that run to different areas in which herders and other merchants would go down to Egypt and trade with Egyptians. They would go to Babylon and trade with the Babylonians. It wasn't all about sheep herding and livestock and nomadic herding at the time. There were some people that settled down and were craftsmen. This is the land of Goshen as drought strikes again. Many of the Hebrew people had to go to Goshen, which is the northern part of Egypt, to buy food. There's much food being grown here in the Nile River Valley at the time. As you can see, here's where Goshen's at. Here's a picture of the Nile River. You remember, the Nile River was very effective, and the Egyptians were very effective using the Nile River for irrigation. So they were able to grow plenty of food, and the Hebrews went down there to trade for food. But after a while, they became farmers in Egypt and stayed. But they were not allowed to leave after hundreds of years as the Egyptians turned them into slaves. Next, we're going to talk about the patriarch Moses. Moses is a unique situation. Moses was born to a Hebrew slave woman who was trying to avoid Moses being killed by the Pharaoh's law that was passed. It says all firstborn male sons of the Hebrew people were to be executed. So she sticks him in a wicker basket and places him on the Nile. And he floats him down the Nile, and he is discovered by Pharaoh's sister, who takes Moses in and it really adopts him and raises him in the Egyptian court, the court of Pharaoh. He was taught all the religion of the Egyptians. He was taught the customs. He was taught various academic skills such as math and writing and philosophy. He was a very learned man. But Moses did not remain in the Egyptian court, as God kind of impressed upon his heart, the Hebrew faith says, and he felt sorry for his native people, the Hebrews. So God called him to lead the Hebrew people out of bondage, out of Egypt, and back into the land of Canaan, the promised land where Abraham first settled. This journey from being in slavery in Egypt back to Canaan was known as the Exodus. All the children of Israel left Egypt after Moses, with the help of Yahweh, God, performed many miracles and really put a bunch of curses and plagues upon the Egyptians, in which they interpreted to come from Moses' God, and did not want to anger him any further. He let the Hebrews go. So they took off, and thus they started on the route of the Exodus. As you can see by here, you see the starting point up here in Goshen. They traveled south, east, and crossed the Red Sea, the northern half, and the Gulf of Suez. This is where one of Abraham's first miracles on the Exodus takes place, in which legend has it that Moses was able to part the Red Sea and allowed the Hebrews to pass on dry ground right through the middle of the Red Sea as they were being pursued by Pharaoh, who had changed his mind about letting the Hebrew people go. As you journey south, the people of the Hebrew people became disenfranchised and become very disobedient to what God was trying to tell them and the guidance that he gave Moses. Finally, down here at Mount Sinai, God pulled Moses up into the mountain and gave him a set of rules or commandments in which the Hebrew people were to follow and obey. These are famously called and notoriously called, as we find, the 10 Commandments. The 10 Commandments were a new covenant that God made with the Hebrew people. Remember, the first covenant or promise was made to Abraham as he was faithful and obedient to leave Ur in Babylon and settle in Canaan. Well, the second covenant, the new covenant, was made with God between him and the Hebrew people. He says, if you follow these 10 commandments, and they're listed right here, I will bless you once again. You will be fruitful. All your needs will be met. You will be a chosen, protected people. Here's a picture of Mount Sinai in southern present-day Saudi Arabia. Moses was to venture up, spent many days as God gave him the 10 commandments. He came back down, showed the Hebrew people the commandments, and then they built an Ark of Covenant, an Ark of Promise in which the 10 commandments were placed in there. After Moses arrived back into Canaan, Israel started a succession of kings. First starting with Saul, who was disobedient to God and removed from his kingship. Then came David, who built the first stone temple in which the Ark of the Covenant was placed. And it was a very successful kingdom, as you can see how far it is spread out. David was a man that feared God, obeyed God, and the country of the Hebrew people were blessed. David's son, Solomon's, had even a greater kingdom, in which the area and land in which he controlled grew. And he was very rich, and he built God, Yahweh, a very ornate and fancy and elaborate temple. Had a lot of gold in it, golden doors, golden overlay on the utensils, golden walls. It was very, very, very fancy. But even Solomon couldn't hold the kingdom together, as different countries surrounding Israel, seeing that Israel was very rich and was very successful, and they attacked, destroyed, and plundered. What we have here is a recreation in present-day Jerusalem, in which you can see a picture of Solomon's temple. It's a model. Notice the people standing in the background. It's not to scale. It's just a replica, a model of the temple, what the temple would look like back in the days of Solomon. Here's a brief diagram of Solomon's temples in which you have the holiest of holies in the back of the temple where the covenant box or the Ark of the Covenant was placed. Inside the Ark of the Covenant was the Ten Commandments written in the stone with the finger of God. It had a famous porch in which the priests would stand on the porch and minister to the people. Inside the tabernacle, you had some instruments that were used in the religious practice of the Hebrews at the time. Once again, you can see the holiest of holies in the back, where the Ark of the Covenant was placed with the written law of God, the Ten Commandments. Here's what a picture of what the Ark of the Covenant looked like. It was overlaid in solid gold. Inside this box was the Ten Commandments. The Temple Mount today in Jerusalem, all that's left of Solomon's great temple is the Western Wailing Wall, as it was destroyed completely by the Roman conquerors in 70 A.D. In the background, you can see the Dome of the Rock, which is a building of the Islamic faith. This is where the Prophet Muhammad was said to ascend to heaven. So it is a very sacred shrine in the Islamic faith, right next to a very sacred shrine in the Judean faith. As Israel grew, it was divided into two kingdoms. In the northern kingdom, you had the kingdom of Israel. And in the southern portion, you had the kingdom of Judah. As you see, they were both conquered by different countries. Israel was conquered in 722 AD the first time by Assyria. And Judea was conquered by King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon in 587 AD. At both of these instances, the Hebrew people were taken off and placed into slavery once again. Why? It is believed that these people were not faithful and obedient to Yahweh, the God that established the covenant promise with them. As you can see, the route in which the conquerors took the people back into their lands. Here you have the Assyria, located in the north, that took the Israelis, kingdom of Israel, captive. And in the south, the Babylonians took the Jews into captivity. They were allowed to return after the end of their captivities. They were convinced by the kings of each respective country that they deserved to go back home, and they were faithful to their God. After the two kingdoms were conquered, they returned back to the respective kingdoms. But I also wanted to mention that around this time, and even a little after, the Greeks came of power, and everyone's heard of probably Alexander the Great. He was a Greek general that conquered most of the known world at the time. And he came through Israel and conquered it once again and brought the tradition of Greeks, the Hellenist tradition, which really flew right into the face of the Jewish faith. Greek civilizations believed in polytheistic religion. It means they had many gods, whereas the Jewish people had one God, Yahweh. The Greeks had many gods and control of many different aspects of their life. So there was kind of a headbutting and clashing there. Here we have a picture of a Hebrew person reading the Torah. As I said earlier, the Torah is one of the most sacred writings of the Jewish faith. It is the first 5 books, the Pentateuch, plus some additional books, all put together in one book called the Torah. It is kind of like the Jewish Bible. And this is the standard for their faith. All the rules and practices that are carried out of the Jewish faith come from the Torah.